Really excited to bring you today's video with my good friend Ryan Burney of Bear Innovation. We're going to be discussing all things reach and really just if it boils down to if it's something that really matters with bike geometry. This is something that I'm really passionate about over the last few years as I've tried to dive deep into bike setup and just optimize my setup to find the best performance out there on the trail. Reach has been something that I've gravitated towards through the years. And it's been funny as Ryan and I have been chatting about doing some videos like this. He's like, dude, I just don't know if it really matters. So he is the perfect person to talk about this topic with. He's been a bike industry engineer for 9 years now and is just such a good dude. So I'm going to pass off to him to tell you a bit about himself, and then we'll get into today's video.
Yeah. So back in the day, I used to race downhill bikes. We used to hang out at Highland a lot. And during that racing, I realized I wanted to go and make bikes. And I'm like, oh, who makes bikes? I'm like, oh, bike engineers. I'm like, okay, sweet. I guess I'm going to be a bike engineer. And so from when I was about probably 16 years old, my life revolved around trying to figure out how to become a bike engineer. And so I kind of did it and chipped away at becoming one by leveraging the people I knew from racing that worked in the bike industry and being like, hey, I'm around, I'm a mechanical engineer. I kind of know what I'm doing, I guess, with bikes, and any jobs open. And that kind of worked out. Or right out of college, I got a job as a design engineer for Cannondale. And actually in college, I was an intern at SRAM as well. That was pretty fun in the Colorado Springs facility for their mountain bike wheel and brake team. That helped me get that job at Cannondale. So I was in Connecticut at their headquarters at the time. We were engineering bikes for both Cannondale and GT. So I got to be part of the development for the Flex Day on the Cannondale Scalpel cross country bike, on that chainstay that has a flat plate of carbon fiber that replaces a pivot. That was a really cool first carbon project for me. Got kind of thrown into the deep end, but I learned a ton. So super grateful for that. And then throughout the years, went full time onto GT projects where I was lead engineer in the latest GT Fury downhill bike. So my dream since I was like 14, 16 was to make a downhill bike, and we did it. And it won some World Cups, which was pretty sweet as well. So now here we are, wanted to kind of do my own thing. And so I really like working with friends and helping other people make bikes for their companies. And that's essentially what we do at Bear Innovation. It's a small engineering firm up here in Richmond, Vermont. We just got our first office space where me and my friends who are engineers and designers, we help bike companies develop their new product, and we help other industries as well. So if someone has a cool idea and we think it's something that we want to help that individual or company create, we'll go do it if we're all going to learn from it and have a good time and make a cool product. So that's kind of what I'm up to now.
Love it, dude. And yeah, for my regular audience, I can't say enough good things about Ryan. Like when I was, I think like 14 or something, he'd let my dad just drop me off with him and he'd drive me up to the bike park for the day. And I feel like when you're a young Grom, just like, I don't know, anywhere from like 13 to 16, like before you can start driving, like having role models like you, like in my life and other kids' life, I feel like it's super important. So yeah, really just thankful that you were always cool to me as a kid. And yeah, it's cool that now we're both still in the bike industry doing more adult stuff. Both still riding bikes, but also doing it as a job. So that's cool. And yeah, dude, I just appreciate the time today. So really to dive right into this, we're going to be discussing the topic of today's video, which is, does reach really matter? I guess for a bit of background on kind of like my sort of standpoint on this. So for me, like when I started getting more into bike setup and things, like I'm just a big Richie Rude fan, as most people would be, of course. And then it's like, you look at his bike setup and he rides a relatively small bike given his stature. I'm 5'11". I think you're similar height. And I'd kind of look at him. I think at the time, the SB 165 or 160, whichever model he was on, was like a 460 reach. So then I just like see that because I was riding for YT. So then I'd kind of look and be like, okay. And then I'm like, oh, wow, reaches for like a medium for one brand are way different than a medium for another, and vice versa. And even this week, as actually a homie asked me about a bike, and I went, and the medium of that brand was a 470, and the large of my RE of the same category bike was a 474. And I was like, hey, there's still some discrepancy here. And I think it can be a helpful measurement, like more so than just sizing, but there is still discrepancy across brands. And it's just something that I need to learn more about. And that's why we're talking about it. So what are your kind of general thoughts on reach? Like, do you think it matters? And like, how do you think the best way to look at that geometry measurement is?
Yeah, totally. So the only thing that really matters is that you can have a bike that's too big for you. And so what I mean by that is if you're riding your bike and you start to get, for instance, pulled down the hill by your arms being fully straight out, and you're going to go over the bars because you're out of control because the bike is literally dragging you down that hill, your bike's probably too long. Other than that, it doesn't matter too much. It really depends on what your goals are as a rider and what your priorities are. And I like how you pointed out, there was a medium and a large from two different companies that were almost the same reach number. And that probably is because their goals are just different. So in general, the longer your reach, the longer your bike is going to be, and the longer your bike is, the more stable it typically is. And the shorter the reach, the more nimble that bike's going to be. It's a shorter bike. You can move it around more easily. And so where you want to end up on that spectrum in terms of like, well, I want a more nimble bike and that's more playful, like that aligns with my goals. I'm sure that's something that you're probably looking for as a free ride athlete. Or if your goal is to go literally as fast as possible and set the fastest World Cup track time that has ever been seen, your goal and your priorities probably are to have a more stable bike. And so that's where a lot of it comes down to. Now, I think with a long and a short reach, or with the different reaches, it's really important to consider bar height and where your body is positioned relative to your handlebars. Because one thing that we used to see a lot back in the day, and like I say back in the day, I'm like 31, so like that's not that long ago when I was 16 or whatever. But bars used to be super, super low. And you used to hear people going over the bars all the time, right? It was like a super common thing. People still go over the bars these days, but you see it less and less often. And I think the main reason for that is bar height has increased. And the reason for that is if your bars are higher, it's really hard to go over them if your bike hits a hole and suddenly stops. And that's one thing I really like to focus on is, okay, you can have a really, really short reach on your bike. But if your bars are really, really high, if you suddenly hit that hole and stop, are you going to very easily go over the handlebars and get hurt? If the answer to that is no, then that reach is probably fine. If you're happy with that, how that bike handles, and you're safe, like wonderful. Like the first priority is like, if you're safe, you're going to be able to continue riding. Because if you're getting hurt all the time, like you're just not that productive as a rider, right? Like you're injured. So like, I don't know, I think reach and bar height are super, I think bar height's super, super important. Reach less so.
Okay, that's awesome. Because yeah, literally, as I mentioned before we started recording, like we just did a full discussion on bar height and kind of the impacts of things. And I think back to like what you were saying about like myself as a free rider and sort of my goals with bike sizing and setup. So for instance, if someone's a regular viewer of the channel, they'll know this. So I apologize for sounding monotonous, but my downhill bike, which is more of like a slopestyle bike, if pink bike commenters were to call it whatever. But it's 190 single crown, 200 mils rear travel, 440 reach with a 444 back end. I'm 5'11" tall for reference. So that is a small bike for my height, but my goals with that are to do tail whips, 360 drops and things. And I mentioned this in last week's upload, but for me, like a common thing that I look to look for in a setup is like, say you were to hand me your bike, Ryan, and I'm like riding in the driveway. If I can get like close to being able to pop up like a wheelie pretty easily and it not being like too strenuous on my shoulders, I'm like, okay, I can probably hang on this thing. Cause I don't need like on my free ride bike, I need to essentially be able to like loop that bike out on flat ground. That's kind of what I look for. And then on like a trail bike, so for instance, my 150, 140 bike, the Ari Delano, which I ride a lot, that's a 480 reach. And I got a pretty high setup on there. And I'm able to like kind of manual it on flat ground, but not like super easily. But I enjoy the longer wheelbase that the longer reach gives me for overall stability. So it's all about compromises, as is bar setup as well. That kind of comes into this, as you mentioned. And for me, like I see those compromises in different areas of my riding. Like on the free ride side, I'm down to have a more nimble, like almost too nimble of a bike for most people in order to do tail whips and tricks. Versus my trail bike, I'm kind of looking for that extended wheelbase so I can push the pace and feel comfortable. Not that I need to ride fast. I'm not a racer, but for me with content, like I think that speed just translates to the footage and I want to go fast. And that's just like a personal pursuit of mine. So that's kind of one thing that I look for. And then building off what you said with the bar height, like what's kind of your stance? Like one thing that I find really interesting is how when you go up with your bars, if you have a neutral bar roll. So for instance, on my most recent e-bike build, I did a 55 mil rise bar. That's going up hypothetically at your head tube angle. So you're actually losing a bit of horizontal distance on like that reach number. Is that something that you think has like any merit or something that people could consider? Or do you think that's a bunch of baloney?
So it depends on the bar design, but typically as a bar is designed, as you increase the rise, the actual touch points go straight up. Okay. Not necessarily, and it all depends, right? It depends on your head angle. It depends on like, because you have back sweep and you have up sweep, right?
Yep.
And then typically, if you're looking at your bike from the side, yep, and your handlebars are tilted back or tilted forward, yep, that will dramatically affect how the bar height changes your reach, especially. Yep. Like if it's slightly tilted forward, you'll actually start to see the reach increase. Totally. But if it's completely flat and you raise the bar, it actually just goes up. Yeah. Depending on the head angle, assuming the head angle kind of complements the back sweep or the up sweep, I guess. So I think what you're talking about is especially true when you just add spacers under your stem. Yep. Your bars come at you at the same angle as the head tube angle. And so you're really shortening the reach quickly. Now, if you have a bike where you want to raise your bars, but you like that reach that you have, the best way to do that is to buy riser bars, not to add a bunch of spacers under your stem.
Gotcha. So essentially, like if someone is on a bike that's maybe feeling a touch too long, they're looking to shorten it, adding spacers under the stem is a more surefire way of going. I guess hypothetically, you could do forward bar roll, which is something I've played with in the past. I don't generally prefer it. Like I feel like anything other than like a relatively neutral roll looks kind of weird to me. But I like what you said about the spacers versus the difference with the bar setup. And out of curiosity, so how tall are you again?
5'11" 3/4. So I like to say 6 foot, but
okay.
It's not technically true.
Yeah. So then like what, you said you're on an old sensor at the moment. Like what kind of size frame do you like to ride? Like what's your bar setup? People love hearing like reference points like that. I'd be curious to hear your setup.
Yeah. So I have a funny setup right now. So I have a 473 reach, I think, on my sensor trail bike. Okay. I kind of over forked it, so it reduced the reach a teeny tiny bit. And I was rocking a 30 mil rise bar. Okay. But recently I've been riding a lot of steep stuff on it, and I'm like running out of arm travel every now and then. I want to raise my bar, so I put a 60 mil riser bar on there, and then I reduced the spacers underneath the stem by 15 mil. So it's like really like a 45 mil riser bar compared to what I was riding. If that math adds up, it's about. It feels like that. That's all really that matters. So pretty high bars. Now the limit on bar height comes down to essentially front wheel grip. And the reason for that is the higher you bring your bars, the less you're leaning over the front wheel to add weight to that front wheel to make sure you have grip. And that's actually, I love this topic because that's the main reason as to why you see people talking about having longer chainstays on their bikes these days. And the whole reason for having a longer chainstay, well, the main reason, not the whole reason, but the main reason is if you lengthen the rear end of your bike, it just puts more weight onto your front tire. And if you have more weight on your front tire, you can get away with just raising your bars, because even though as you raise your bars, you're putting less weight on your front tire, that's okay, because we just put some weight on your front tire by increasing the length of the chainstay. And so that's why I think you're seeing the bar height discussion being very hot right now, and the chainstay length being very hot right now. And that's because they're correlated. Like they go with each other. You want a higher bar, you probably want a longer chainstay.
Yeah, I had a good feeling that was going to come up today. And that's actually one of my little notes I had. Like, so building off of that, what's the chainstay on your sensor? Is that pretty modest?
442. So like I had to go back down in bar height because I was starting to lose front end grip. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like I couldn't quite make the most out of that 60 mil riser bar.
Yep. And then for you, like on the bikes that you've ridden and even designed in the past, like, do you find like generally, and this will lead into another question, but like, do you feel like regardless of reach, obviously side specific chainstays are nice, but like, do you feel like there's a specific length that you prefer the way it rides? Like I have a few bikes right now, like my Nebo, which is my SLE bike, that's 474 reach with a 440 back end. So almost like identical to where you're at. And I think that that's a really good compromise. Like I like the way that feels, but what are some numbers that you've kind of ridden and felt good to you?
I think that number is pretty much spot on to where a lot of modern bikes are. I think especially for like a trail bike, an aggressive trail bike, that's a great way to go. I think a lot of it depends on how steep the terrain you're going to be riding is as well, because one of the reasons you might need to go higher in bar height is because you're going down something really, really steep, and you don't want to be pulled down the hill like we were talking about earlier by the bars on your bike because you run out of arm travel, especially as you go off of like a little cliff and your front wheel dips down and your front wheel just disappears. You want to make sure that you can move your arms as you're going over that terrain and you just don't get dragged down by your bike. So I think for a trail bike, yes, I think that's a wonderful setup. And then for an enduro bike, it all depends. A lot of it depends on reach, funny enough. So we're coming back to the reach thing where, okay, it's not that important, but your bike can be too long, right?
Yeah.
So if you need an enduro bike that's going down steep terrain, but you need it to be nimble because you don't know the trail that's ahead of you because you can't memorize the whole trail. Well, it's like, okay, well, I need to make sure I'm behind my bars so I don't go over them, so I'm safe and I can ride this terrain fast. And if I hit a hole, I'm not going to go straight over the bars. But I need my bike to be nice and nimble. Okay, bars need to go higher. Oh, I need more weight on the front end. Okay, chainstay needs to get a little bit longer in order to compensate for that. So I think you'll start to see the Geo evolve a little bit by having a longer chainstay for an enduro bike. And then for a downhill bike, that's where things can get a little weird because there's actually a spectrum of, we call basically the distance between your bottom bracket and your front axle to front center, right? And the distance between your bottom bracket and the rear axle to rear center. And people like to talk about
I was just about to bring this up.
front center, rear center ratio is a big thing.
Yeah.
You can dig into that. I don't know the exact numbers that your front center to rear center ratio needs to be, but downhill bikes right now in particular are kind of funny in that you have two sides of the spectrum and they both can win World Cups, which is interesting. So you have that new specialized downhill bike, which I was lucky enough to get to ride that prototype.
We should shout out that video if anyone wants to actually see Ryan shredding as well and talking more about some other cool bikes that no one else gets to ride, like that specialized demo that's not available for people to get their hands on. He did a really sick series with Jason Schroeder over at Vital, who's another homie of mine. They did a really great job testing some various bikes, and regardless if they're bikes you want to buy, it's just cool to hear these guys rap out about bike setup. And obviously Ryan's super knowledgeable, so is Jason. He's a bunch of racing experience, and it's really cool just hearing their discourse about those. So that's I'll link that down in the description if people want to check out those videos.
Rad. Yeah. So in that, we basically get to look at the Specialized, and the Specialized is unique in that it's actually pretty short. It's got like a 473 reach for on a size large and a 445 chainstay, which is like, oh, that's like a trail bike. We were just talking about those numbers pretty much, right? Yeah. The bars are nice and high and the bottom bracket's nice and low. So you're definitely in the bike.
Do you know what the BB drop was on that bike? Actually, I think I had it written down somewhere. I won't go. I'll look for it later.
No, I'd call it like in the middle of modern BB drops. I wouldn't call it stupid low, and it definitely wasn't too high. So like you definitely felt in the bike. And again, by in the bike, I mean like behind my bars enough. Yeah. Not over my bars. And that bike has won World Cups. So it's like, wait, that's like trail bike geometry. Weird. Okay, well, it works, but there are compromises to that. And the compromises were, especially when riding at high speed, you had to really wrangle the bike. And, for Loic Bruni in the Specialized World Cup team, like that's their job. They're like, no problem. I'll have a nimble bike. I can be really, really good in the corners and the technical sections. The bike fits in the corners. It's just not too long. And then the high speed stuff, I'll just deal with it. I'll wrangle the bike. I'll manhandle it. And then on the other side,
you'll be Loic Bruni and do your Loic Bruni things.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm not Loic Bruni, so I can't do Loic Bruni things. And so we can look at the other side of the spectrum, which is that Frameworks bike, which is a pretty dang long bike. It's only got, I want to say it's like a 485 reach, but it has a really tall head tube. So the actual placement of where your hands are in the bars is like it's pretty long, especially for a downhill bike. And on that
So
bike,
what's the back end on that is 445 or 450? Or were you saying the reach
for
or
the Specialized,
no, for the Frameworks? Were you just saying the reach was what on that? Or did you
the reach was like 485.
485 and then with I think it was a 450 back end on that bike?
It was a 450 or 460. I'd actually have to check.
Okay.
I don't really
Cool.
remember.
Okay.
So maybe we put that up on the.
Yeah, I'll put it up on the screen right now.
And you're thinking like, oh, it's only like that much different, right? But it feels like a really big difference when you're riding it, which is pretty funny. But that bike is on the longer side of things, and it was super stable at speed. So it was kind of the opposite in philosophy, in that it's like, okay, when you're charging down a World Cup track and you're scared, it makes life way easier because the bike's just doing all the work. It's super stable. Now, in the tighter stuff, you really have to put some work into getting it to get around the terrain that you're trying to get around and get around the corners that you're trying to get through. So it took a bit more effort on that part of the track. But that one can win World Cups too. And it has under ASA. So it's like you have a long bike that's super stable and it wins World Cups. And then you have a shorter bike that's not as stable and it can win World Cups as well. But what was consistent between both of them was the bars were reasonably high.
Yeah.
And so again, it comes back to the point of it doesn't really matter too much. It's just, what do you want out of your bike? Do you want stability? Do you want nimbleness, or do you want right in between? And yeah, let's just make sure your bars are high enough so that you're safe. So that was like a really interesting thing because you can get away with both of them. It really just depends on what you want to do. I did find on the Frameworks bike in the really, really steep sections, I did start to run out of arm travel every now and then. Okay. So that was the limit of reach. Like, so back to the question of, does reach matter? It's like, it did, kind of. Like, it was, the bike was a little bit too long for me. I would have shortened the reach by just a teeny tiny bit and it would have fit me absolutely perfectly.
Awesome. Which I think you can do with -5 cups on that bike. Like if I'm assuming you rode it in the neutral position, but I think that's got the adjuster in there and that makes total sense. And that leads me perfect into like what you were saying with the arm travel and the bar height feeling you had on both of those. Do you think, building off like the front center rear center ratio, which we mentioned briefly there, is reach stack ratio something that you would ever pay attention to or think about? That's something that for me, as I've tried to optimize my handlebar setup. So like last year, I was in between bike sponsors from switching from YT to RE. So I had like a few common sols, I had an Ibis, I had a Yeti. So I just had like different bikes and I was just trying to figure them out. And like, I sent you the chart with like how I have everything written down. I was just trying to make sense of like how all this stuff works. And one thing that I noticed, and through looking just at some of the bikes we mentioned there, like the new demo, and the Frameworks, I think it's interesting seeing which brands are incorporating which reach stack ratios. Cause I think stack, that's like really what starts your cockpit setup essentially, in a sense. So is that something that you think about? Do you think it matters much? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what really matters is, how high you want your hands to be relative to where your feet are. And so if you can figure out what makes you happy and gives you the body position of like, okay, my hands are up here, my bottom bracket and feet are down here, you can move that up, you can move that down. The lower limit, so with BB drop, the lower limit of that is you just start dragging your feet on things and you might break a foot. And like that isn't super fun if you break
That's not
foot.
safe.
So you go all the way down and you're like, oh, well, that's the lower limit for BB drop. So we go a little bit up and you're like, okay, that's as low as I can go. And do I want a longer bike because I want more stability, or do I want a shorter bike because I want more nimbleness? Like, that's totally up to you. It doesn't really matter. And how high you go is dependent on what your preference is for handling. the lower the bottom bracket, typically the more stable or locked into a corner you're gonna feel like. And then the higher you go in bottom bracket, you can kind of like wash the bike around a little bit more easily underneath you. So if you're trying to do tire slides and like drift on terrain, like a higher bottom bracket might suit your preference. If you're trying to go as fast as possible and be super stable, a lower bottom bracket might suit your preference. But
yeah, I love what you said there, because that's actually something I've played around with a lot recently. So like, for instance, with the bike I've been spending a ton of time on is that Delano 150 fork, 140 rear. So I actually set that, and it's got a flip chip on there. And I actually am running that low with a ghetto mullet setup to get the BB drop lower. Just because I mostly just ride square edge hits, and it's high enough where I don't hit pedals on anything, but it is really low that I feel like it makes the bike feel super planted. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, the Timp, which is my full power bike, that is got redesigned this year, so a little bit more up to date geometry than where the Delano's at. That bike, I actually tried to do the same thing out of curiosity, and I was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Like, was dragging pedals everywhere. So yeah, finding the limits is key. And that's something that I talked about with Joel from Blueprint with our handlebar setup. He mentioned that the key to all of this just comes down to bracketing with the bar setup stuff and trying to find those limits. And that's like what I'm doing with putting the, like, making those bikes mullet in the settings they're not supposed to be, is I'm just like curious to see like what the extremes feel like. And that's a little bit harder with reach, like unless your bike has adjustable headset cups, like you can't go from like +10 to -10. It does take like maybe hopping on a homie's bike, or like if you're doing a demo ride event with a brand, then that's a great opportunity to ride like a medium and a large if you're between sizes and things of that manner. And I think that kind of brings me to another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Ryan. And it's honestly an email I get a lot. Like, I actually just have like my little athlete portfolio that I send to sponsors, like linked in the description of all the videos. And there's a little email thread, and people find that and hit me up about this. And it's people just like wondering if they should consider reach when buying a new bike. Should people just trust a size chart? How would you recommend a consumer, like say someone's looking at a new bike, I don't know what height would be in between sizes. Sometimes I feel a little in between sizes. I don't know about yourself, but how would you say someone should go about that in like the most educated manner that they can?
I love referencing something that you know the feel of. So if you already have a bike, or if you don't already have a bike, your friend has a bike, and you can just ride around on that bike and you can get a sense for, this is a little bit too big, this is a little bit too small, or this is just right. Then you can look up the geo chart for that bike and get a basic understanding of like, okay, well, that bike was 470 reach, it felt a little bit too small. Okay. Whether it's a medium or a large on the website for that other bike you're looking at, you can just look straight at that reach number and be like, okay, well, that new one's like 475. The 470 did feel a little bit too short. And then within that, like, that takes a little bit of experience, right?
Totally.
So at a certain point, you kind of have to take that leap, or go demo some bikes, or rent a bike that has that same reach number. So you can just get a gut check for it. And then I like to always err on the side of going a little bit smaller in terms of reach.
I agree.
If you're not sure, because as long as you can get that bar height up, and with that, make sure your chainstay is long enough. Like, if you're really unsure, the perfect scenario would be pick the shorter of two frame sizes, and then ideally your bike will have an adjustable chainstay length, like a Specialized or something like that.
Yeah, Ari's got it too.
Perfect. And then you can't go wrong, because if you need the bars to be higher, then you can just make the chainstay longer, and perfect, you're good to go. So I hope that simplifies things enough, but I think it's okay to trust the manufacturer's recommendations, especially if the riding style presented by the manufacturer and the advertising, if it's like more of a free ride style, and they say that you should be on a medium, then I think it's okay to trust them on that.
Yep, totally. And I think, it's super cool. Like, certain brands handle it differently. Like, one thing that's cool about Ari is you can kind of send in some of your measurements of your body proportions, and they'll recommend it just based on customer experience. I was just chatting with one of the guys over there today about this, how they do it. I just called them up because I was curious. I was like, where did you guys get this from? And they're like, just through like data that they've had on like return rates and stuff on sizes. And they're like, most of the time people get a size that they're pretty happy with. So I like what you said there about how if you feel comfortable with the manufacturer, you can trust it. And I also loved what you said about erring on the side of caution for going smaller, because you can always go to a 50 mil stem. I like a 40 mil stem. What do you ride for stem length?
Depends. Between 40 and 50.
Right. And I think it's typically better to go longer on stem versus I've had a few, like the Delano, once again, I just played with everything to try to find a comfy setup on that. And I messed around with the 32 mil stem on that a little bit this year. And I was like, this is not it. So I'd rather see someone riding the 50 than a short one. You're going to probably get more performance out of that, I'd say. Would you agree on that? Or what's kind of your take on stem length in that regard?
Yeah, I think stems have remained pretty fixed in terms of size, because like a stem can handle how quick your steering is. Or sorry, a stem can like dictate how quick your steering is or how
That's
slow it is.
something that Joel mentioned last week as well. He is super sensitive to that. So he's 50 mil on every bike, which I really liked him bringing up that point.
And the more consistent that people are in general in the mountain bike space on stem length, it allows us to develop the geometry of bikes a bit more easily, because we're reducing the number of variables. So I think the stem is kind of like the last thing I like to go to for adjusting the fit of a bike, just because I want everything else to be right before we go and adjust the stem length. But I'm also coming from the creator of the bike's perspective, not the consumer of the bike. So like if we're testing bikes, like, you know, I'm not going to go change stem length. Like I'm looking for the character of the bike as it was designed with the geo that was presented, and trying to basically control as many variables as possible. So I'm probably not your stem length expert because I try not to touch it, but 40 is fine.
Okay, I was gonna say, so like default, like you get a new bike, you're just gonna slap like a 40 on it, or just like run whatever came on the thing.
Yeah. So if I was to build a bike, 40. If I was to buy a bike that already came complete, you know, the manufacturer might have deliberately chosen a certain size because they're trying to provide a certain ride experience. Just like fork offset can control trail, like so different. You have two different fork offsets a lot of the times, and so like, you know, if I was Ari and I chose a 44 mil fork offset, like there's usually a reason for that. And if you go to a different fork offset, it might totally tweak the handling and maybe not in a good way. So I like to use the stuff that is commonly used for stem length and fork offsets so that we can tune the character of the bike via all of the other things on the frame itself.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you're the perfect person to speak to that as the guy who has designed many of bikes. So I think that's really great. And I guess one other thing kind of on that, circling back to what you mentioned earlier about finding the limit lengthwise, you mentioned that the frameworks at times felt maybe a little too extended for you. Say you're a customer, Ryan, you're going to go start shopping for a new bike.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about earlier about how you'd maybe prefer someone to go on the shorter side to be careful. Is there a reach number for you at your given height that you're like, okay, red flag, like I'm a little scared to go that obviously chainstay length will come into this, but is there like a rough range where you're like, okay, maybe that's like a little too long for me, like I'm not going to buy that?
Yeah, like once you get above 480, I start to be like, it's just not that useful for me. I've ridden 490s, I've ridden 500s.
Wow. Okay.
And they're sweet on flatter terrain. But unfortunately, steep terrain is important as well. And it turns out you have to be in control when you're going down something steep. So when you have to
you'd hope
consider that. Yeah. So you have to consider that. And so, yeah, my reach limit is like 480. Even on my downhill bike, my reach is 480 right now on my Fury. Okay. And I think I don't really race anymore, but if I were, I'd go into a shorter headset position just to make it a little bit shorter. There's really just not. I feel like the potential to crash is there by having a bike that might be right on the edge of being too long for you.
Yep.
And so it never hurts to go a little bit shorter and then keep the bars a little bit higher. And you're never going to get pulled down the hill unexpectedly. And because you're never going to get pulled down the hill unexpectedly, and you know that, you can ride more aggressively and just never have that in the back of your mind.
Yep.
And so that's why, I'd always recommend going a little bit shorter. I mean, my large Rocky Mountain flatline from 2012, I think it was a 440 reach or something
Yeah, I
like
think
that.
I think you let me hop on that thing at one
Yeah,
point.
yeah. And that was a large, and people
Yeah,
won World Cups on those bikes. Like someone who was 6 foot used to win on like a 440, 430 reach.
yeah,
And like, again, as long as you're not going to go over the bars and get hurt, yeah, you can go pretty short. I think it'd be weird for me to ride that again just because it's been so long and I'm
dude,
so
totally.
used to I'm like so used to how comfortable a more modern Geo feels. But I have definitely felt the upper limit and I don't recommend it.
Yeah, that's cool to hear that you've tried 490 and 500. I haven't quite dabbled that high yet. So this year I've been on the biggest bikes I've ever had. So like my trail bike, the Delano 480 right now, that's like the biggest trail bike that I spend a substantial amount of time on. Then my e-bike, I actually need to check. I can put it in a mode that puts it at 485, I think. So I was going to toss it. I think I need to put a 29er on the back, which I might do that just to play around and see what it feels like. But yeah, I feel like for me, as soon as I get to like anywhere above 480, I'm like, whereas like my lightweight e-bike 474, I'm like pretty cruisy with it. My long travel trail bikes at 465, that feels pretty happy to me. And then, yeah, I used to ride like when I was on YT, their mediums were like right around 450. I'd run that a bunch with like a 50 mil stem. It felt pretty good.
Yeah.
But I've mostly, for me, I found that I've been trying to go longer to learn, and I've been trying to go longer to learn how to ride and manage a longer wheelbase so I can up my pace. Has kind of been my standpoint on it for my trail bikes and things. Obviously, free ride bike, I'm super small with the 440 reach. It's like I think it's 434, but then I have a dual 27.5 set up. So I asked ChatGPT, I put in the axle to crown difference, and I was like, "What do you think my reach is?"
Well, if you ever need that number and want it in CAD, just let me know. I'm happy to
That's
mock
why I
that up
brought
for
that
you.
up. I thought you'd probably think that was funny.
Yeah. Sometimes it's right. I mean, who knows?
It's probably not. And I'll actually mention this to you because you'll laugh at this. I just for like curiosity's sake, I like tried to take my. I'm gonna make a video about this because I think it's a pretty funny thing that I did with this timp I built up a few weeks ago. I was like trying to figure out like what the best bar setup would be like off the rip, like
Yeah.
from the bike build. So I put in the geo number and I like put in like what I wanted the angle from the spindle to the bar to be at the end. And I was like trying to have ChatGPT calculate the exact spacer and bar setup I needed. It was way off, but I tried
Yeah.
it.
I love that.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
One thing I wanted to bring up, well, two things. The first
Yeah.
is, so on e-bikes are funny in that,
Okay.
or they're an interesting little case study because, we were talking about earlier, well, reaches have kind of gotten longer so that the bike is more stable. So it's easier to
Yeah.
go faster, right?
Yeah.
Well, an e-bike's interesting in that it's heavier. So even if it's shorter, it is inherently more stable
Yeah.
than an analog bike that might be a little bit longer because of the weight. And so if your goals are to have the most stable bike possible, then yeah, get to the longest reach that you can manage and make it an e-bike. And that thing's going to be freaking stable. The
Yep.
problem is sometimes it's too stable and you can't
Yep.
get the front end up. Or if you start to, let's say you understeer or get thrown off the trail really quickly, you're going with it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so you run out arm travel again really, really quick and you're like, oh, and you just feel like you're not in control of the crash situation. And that can
Yep.
it can kind of reduce confidence.
Of course.
I like riding a medium e-bike
Mm-hmm.
because it's like it's plenty stable. So like no problems with that. And then I can get the front wheel off the ground more easily. And again, as long as my bars are high enough, I'm safe. So I don't know. What's your take on an e-bike? I
Yeah.
think sizing down is really fun.
So totally. And that's like what I've actually done in the past. Like for instance, like my first e-bike ever was the Gen 1 YT Decoy, and it was a 430 reach, which is crazy.
Nice.
I look at that now, I'm like, wow, that was what medium was at the time. Now my e-bike is sitting at 480 and I'm just starting to get like pretty comfy on this thing. Like yesterday, actually, I went out for a sunrise mission for this clip, and it was like the first time on the bike where I felt like, okay, I'm like really letting this thing have it right now, like kind of get feeling comfy on it, and it's 480 reach. But one thing I found with the full power e-bike, more so than my lightweight e-bike at 474, is I find we have one trail here called Grafton DH, which is just like pointlessly square edge. Like it is exhausting to ride. It's less exhausting on an analog, but on the long full power bike, it's a lot of bike to maneuver. Like
Yeah.
I don't feel super efficient, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I love it. Like as long as I'm riding the bike and the bike's not riding me, I'm ripping. But as soon, like as you said, as the bike starts riding you and you're going with it, then I don't like feeling like a passenger. So I totally love what you said about the sizing down. I'd be pretty curious. T-Mac, actually, we did the launch shoot for this new e-bike earlier this year. He was on the medium, I was on a large, and I hopped on his briefly. And my rationale for going with the large this time around was I knew I was going to be able to get to the most extended reach I'd ever had with the 485 setting. So I was like, hey, that'd be fun to play with. And then when I hopped on his quickly when we were shooting, I think it was just because I hopped from a 480 to a 450. I think the medium, excuse me, I think it's a 455. I'd have to check. But it was like almost too drastic of a change on trail. I was like, man, this thing feels a little twitchy right now. I'm sure I could get used to it or extend stem length or something, but I totally love what you said all around. And it's something that speaks to me right now because I'm totally going through it at the moment. And I'm really excited. I actually have a brand new lightweight e-bike I'm going to build up tomorrow or the next day. So I'll be coming on the channel soon. And I'm excited to do some more back-to-back testing with both. Like go out. I think I'm going to go out to the same trail, ride one on the lightweight, one on the full power. I did a video earlier this year talking about full power versus SL, favoring the SL, and I need to do the same, favoring the full power, just talking about pros and cons. But overall, I think sizing down for a general consumer on the e-bike is probably the right call. Obviously, Ryan and I are more gravity-oriented riders as well, so and that's actually probably a good thing for us to chat about. Is you and I both are more gravity-focused, where reach and finding that upper limit, it might be longer for someone who, or correct me if I'm wrong, it could be longer for someone who's riding less steep terrain. As opposed to someone who's riding steeper terrain.
Yep. Yeah. If you're never going down something that's deep enough to where to run out of arm travel, like don't worry about it. Like a long bike's pretty fun. Like a long down country bike that's super light and peppy is really, really fun.
Yeah. I've been considering building up a bike like that.
Yeah. Like a 485 reach on that, I think would be a great time.
Yep.
Yeah. It just, as long as you're not riding it on the super steep gnarly shoots, like have at it.
Yeah, comment below if you want to see me build up the RE Signal Peak. That's what came out earlier this year. It's like a 110 rear travel, like 120 fork. They had one, they did a demo thing here during Rampage with Kyle Straight, and they just had a bunch of bikes, and the demo guy at RE is super cool dude, super knowledgeable on bike setup stuff too. I'm going to do some conversations with him, I think, in the future. And he had a Signal Peak. I just hopped on it. I was like, dude, I think I could ride this. So yeah, pretty fun stuff. But yeah, that covers most of the stuff I wanted to chat about today. Is there anything in particular you feel like we missed? Any holes in our conversation? What's your vibe?
No, I think I could make things more complicated by bringing up the braking character of a bike and how that affects reach, but we don't really need to dig into that. That's like a super.
I actually am just curious if you wouldn't mind just telling me. I would love to hear it.
Yeah.
What's kind of your vibe on how the different bikes break?
Yeah. So
or different size of bikes rather.
Let's push your reach right up to your limit. Let's go to a 485 reach.
Yeah.
Now you're going down a steep section of trail and you're right on the edge of using all of your arm travel, but you haven't quite used it yet.
Okay.
Acceptable, right? Like, cool. Bike's on the limit of my reach, but it works fine. I'm not running into any issues. It's nice and stable, just like I wanted. Sweet. Now, let's say the bike has a high anti-rise, which is what single pivot bikes typically have, or what like the old super high pivot common sole bikes typically have.
Yep.
Which basically means the rear wheel, as you grab the brake, the rear end squats, or in other words, the rear wheel sort of moves up away from the ground as you brake. So then the rear of the bike drops down. So that actually brings your reach. It keeps it pretty neutral, but it can actually bring it towards you. Now, that's how some bikes still brake like that. And then a lot of bikes, like horse-link bikes like that Specialized, and that Frameworks, the rear end, it has a low anti-rise. So the rear end actually rises up as you brake. Or in other words, the rear tire is pushing into the ground, grabbing for traction, and then lifting the bike off the ground as you're grabbing for traction. So what that does in that super steep scenario is it basically pushes your bars away from you slightly. So we just went from being right on the limit of our reach to now the bike's too long under braking in that exact same scenario. where you're getting tugged down the hill, you're out of arm travel. But with that same reach and a high anti-rise, so our first scenario, that reach is totally fine.
Absolutely.
So that can have a big effect on your reach. And if you're new to mountain biking and you're not quite sure what reach you should have, don't worry about this. You can still just downsize.
Also, if you've made it 46 minutes and us talking about this stuff, hell yeah, because you're trying to get your MTB IQ up. So shout out to you.
So you got to really nerd out to figure out what braking characteristic, or in other words, what anti-rise your bike has.
Yep.
Most bikes these days are running a anti-rise that's under 100%.
Yep.
So that's a low anti-rise. So
yeah,
a Specialized
Nico's like 60, right?
Nico's like 60. The Specialized are similar to that. We actually just saw on Nico's new bike, they went to a single pivot, so they increased anti-rise so that the bike's more neutral under braking, and you can see that on their latest prototype. They haven't said that publicly, but that's what's happening there. I haven't talked to them about that. I just know that's just how it works. That's how single pivots work.
Okay, so that's not insider intel. That's an assumption. I was gonna say maybe I have to cut this section out.
No, that is my personal take on what they're doing. And then you've also seen bike companies that used to have really, really high anti-rise, like the old, like 2019 Common Soul Supreme DH, which was just like a super high single pivot that had a ton of anti-rise, well over 100%. That really squatted into its travel. But the problem with that is your rear end's not grabbing for traction, so you can't slow down as quickly.
I was just going to bring that up. And once again, if you're this deep into this video, I'm sure you'll appreciate hearing this. So we're mentioning specific anti-rise values here. So like the framework, 60%, Ryan just mentioned whatever, over 100, that Common Soul was, could be like 120, whatever. Yeah. Could you just mention, and you just kind of started to touch on it, I just want to intro the subject so it doesn't get lost just in the rest of it. But why? So like you mentioned how higher anti-rise, the bike's going to squat more, lower, it's going to sit up more. It just extends the reach in a steep setting. But why would somebody want like a 60% anti-rise as opposed to a 120? Like and you mentioned it with I know what I'm looking for here, but like why would a designer do this?
Yeah. So if you're a racer and you want to slow down very, very quickly, which means you'd be able to brake later into a corner, which means you're faster through a section because you went from a really, really high speed, slowed down just in time to hit that corner, versus, I had to start grabbing the brake early and then I slowly slow down and then I go through the corner. Like overall, if you look at the change in time, being able to brake later into a corner will typically be faster. Depends on a lot of variables, but like if you run like a super simple study, you're probably going to be a little bit faster when your rear wheel is grabbing for grip and allowing you to slow down quicker. So if you have a low anti-rise, like what the Specialized or the Frameworks has, that rear wheel really grabs for grip as you brake. Now the problem with that is the bike suspension slightly extends as you brake as well, so your reach can move away from you. So that's the compromise there. You have to make sure you have enough arm travel to manage that braking characteristic, if that's what you want. You don't need that to win races though, because both high anti-rise bikes and low anti-rise bikes have gone back to back winning every other race. Like I think it's 2019 where Loic, Bruni, and Amaury Piron were on the complete opposite in terms of style of braking character of bikes, and they were winning back and forth. So it doesn't really matter. It just comes down to what you believe your recipe for winning, whatever winning means to you, whether it's having more fun, or for them, it was going really, really fast and winning World Cup race. It depends on just how you want to do it. And so some people like Greg Minnaar's very famous for speaking about the braking character of his preference, which is he wants the bike to squat. And that is because when you're going through really, really gnarly terrain, if the suspension extends, then you can get thrown forward, your bars are moving away from you. Things happen that you don't necessarily want to happen when you're in a critical moment of the racetrack. And racing is hard. You're going as fast as you possibly can. It's chaos. So if you add more chaos into that, that can cause you to crash. So Manar has always publicly said that he prefers the bike to squat, which is the opposite braking characteristic of like the Specialized and the frameworks. So a bike that has over 100% anti-rise. The rear wheel is not grabbing for traction. It's actually moving away from the ground, and then the bike settles into its travel. You're in a great body position to handle that giant hole you're about to hit or whatever. That's his priority. Both recipes can totally work. It really just depends on what you're looking for. Also, we're seeing a convergence between people who have typically had high anti-rise bikes and people who've had low anti-rise bikes. You're seeing them come together to kind of meet in the middle. So you don't have to worry about it too much. But in general, the takeaway is still, if you're not sure on what your reach should be, and now that we've complicated it even more by adding in, well, if your bike breaks this way, it should be, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Just go a little bit shorter and you're not going to have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, and this was literally like the same thing that Joel and I were talking about with bar setup, is we've been chatting about racing in particular in this instance. Then for me, I mentioned some free ride stuff with my free ride bike, but we're just trying to keep people safe and having a good time on bikes out there. And sizing and cockpit setup has a massive impact on that. And that's why it's worth us having an hour-long conversation about this. Because if you can be educated about why certain things are happening and then do bracketing testing and like just being a more educated consumer and an educated rider, you're going to enjoy mountain biking more. And that's awesome. And that's what I'm trying to help people do, is enjoy bikes more. And to build on that anti-rise thing, just a last little point here, because we're already deep in the sauce. I'm going to shout out, I'll link it down in the description as well. And you may have found this, Ryan. And if not, maybe you can check it out and see if it's legit at all. But there is actually a blog that this guy does. And I think what he's doing is just going into Linkage X3, which I've downloaded and done this too, where you can pinpoint all like the pivot points to try to find out where your anti-squat and anti-rise are, like roughly. And he's done this for like, dude, hundreds of bikes, which is really cool. Cause like anti-rise, anti-squat is not a common thing that bike manufacturers publish. In the instance of the frameworks, Nico's obviously been super open with his design, which is why, those numbers are known. The Specialized thing you might have known I think you guys talked to the product guy in the Vital video.
It's just how a HorseLink bike is laid out. It's that might not be the exact number, but it doesn't really, it's about that same.
So Ryan's got the knowledge and pedigree to speak on that way more than me, but out of my own curiosity, as I've tried to educate myself on these topics, this blog that this guy does has just been cool to see different brands, just to see the anti-rise curves and anti-squat and things like this. For me, I went through his blog post a lot as well for like the leverage curves, as I read like the Race Tech book, and it talked about like some leverage stuff in there, and the two kind of complemented each other. So I'll link that down in the description in case you've enjoyed this section of this video and want to just like see some anti-rise curves. They might not be accurate, but at least you can get an idea of like the chart that Ryan and I would be speaking about right now.
Yeah. So, yeah. And one thing, and like one way to simplify things as well is like, well, what should I have? It's like, well, again, we can just boil it down to, do you want a race bike or do you want a fun bike or do you want something in between? We can look to the marketing of the company to typically figure out what the bike is intended for. So if you want a race bike and you just saw that there's this downhill bike that keeps winning World Cups, and it's like, well, I want a race bike. It's like, well, yeah, get that one. Like you probably won't be wrong. If you want a free ride bike and you're like, well, what should a free ride bike feel like? It's like, well, I don't know, but the best free riders in the world are all riding these bikes over here. If you pick one of those bikes, you're going to have a good time. So you don't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, I love what you said there. It's kind of funny. I feel like for myself, I'm in a different position than a consumer is, but I get even just lost in the sauce because I get hired to make the marketing material for the bike. So if you like the way my free riding looks on my downhill bike, maybe it'll fit you well. So who knows? But yeah, so I'd say that covers basically everything we could talk about with this. And I'd say, yeah, like the main key point, like, does reach really matter? Yes, mostly on the upper end of things. It's a good thing to be aware of. The more educated that you can be out there, I guess out there on the trail about your bike feel, but the more educated you can just be about mountain biking and mountain bike setup, like I'd say the better time you're probably going to have. To an extent, ignorance is bliss, of course. And I loved like what you texted me the other day. I'll toss it up on the screen right now. What was the graph?
Oh, yeah. The midwit meme.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
awesome. I'll put that up
Yeah.
right now. So obviously you can get too lost in the sauce and not actually be making constructive progress as well. So it's kind of delicate. Like for me, I think I mentioned this when we chatted the other day, but I've been getting pretty into golf, and there's this one golf podcast I really like. It's called The Sweet Spot. 2 guys do it. They're super dope. And yeah, they're like, you could listen to us ramble for an hour as long as you just like maybe focus on one thing we talk about, just delete the rest because you can't take in too much knowledge at once. And I was like, I think that's probably true with like a lot of what you and I spoke about today as well.
Yep, I'd agree.
Yeah. So anyways, that wraps up today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is second week. I think this will go up probably, I'll text you or we'll talk about it after, but I think this is going to go pretty soon. So yeah, second time, maybe second week in a row, depending on the upload schedule, that we've had a guest on the YouTube channel as well. So if you guys are enjoying having these experts from different fields in the bike industry, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. So yeah, Joel from Blueprint, he came on, a really talented mountain bike coach, works with a lot of top athletes. He talked about the cockpit setup. And then today having Ryan talk about this topic of reach. And then we got a little off the rails and talked about anti-rise there for about 20 minutes. But it's if you guys are enjoying this, like I'm in a very privileged position to either have sponsors introduce me to people like this, or like Ryan is someone I've known since I was a kid. So I'm in a privileged position to hopefully share conversations like this that can help you guys out. And if you're enjoying it, we'd just love to hear it down below. And if there's any other topics that you'd love to hear myself and Ryan chat about, would love to hear that as well. Feedback is great. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week for another upload. Peace.